Welcome again to the Worldly Spouse channel, where I give day by day or week by week or experiences of living with a born in, full fledged card carrying Jehovah Witness member and the challenges that entails. And on their side of the story, they have big challenges having me around as well. So that particular feeling is sort of mutual in opposite polar separation between us. I've come to the realization that the complete control of my wife by this Jehovah Witness organization is fully complete and very strong. All four characteristics of what is known as the bite model for a high control group is clearly evident and persistent. The first characteristics being behavioral control, the second characteristics being information control, the third characteristics being thought control, and then finally, and the most damaging in my opinion, is emotional control, which makes up the minimum specifications to be in a high control group. And of course, I'm studying all this, and all this is coming to light. And I've tried for the past year and a half since I've collecting all this information, all this knowledge from the internet and YouTube with all these testimonials of the behavior of ex-JWs coming out and giving a contrast sort of comparison of how they felt before they were in the organization and afterwards, and behaviors of their family, behaviors of my family and my in-laws, mainly on my wife's side of the house, compiling all this information together to come up with a clear and concise picture of what is really going on. I'm just not going to take one aspect of this whole ordeal where personally I may be, against or opposed of this particular group, but I needed true fact and hard evidence as to the damage that this is causing to my household before I go further into sort of trying to find a solution on how to save my family from this particular group. As far as my wife, like I said before, she is born in Jehovah Witness from birth, baptized, and that whole progression there. I would imagine the only reason why, well, not the only reason why we got married, but that it was allowed that we were to be married is she was disfellowship in that period of time when we were dating and falling in love and all that good stuff. So that was sort of a loophole into, us marrying. And in her case, while she was disfellowship, they had minimal contact with my wife, so she was left to her own devices out there in the real world. And that's how we got, together. And of course, since nobody was talking to her and shunning her, they didn't have that time or space of time to sort of steer her away from me because I am not of that faith. But then again, at that time or even now, I'm open-minded to all sorts of opinions and difference of opinions and take the other person's point of view of things. And yeah, my wife talked about some of that Jehovah Witness, the things they want to tell a worldly person, not what the actual, complexities of it all, that sort of, scare you from even talking to them. And I approached it with an open mind and until I see and experience a little bit of it, and that's how I determine whether I want to either go with it or not. Obviously, I didn't go with it, though I did give it a chance. For argument's sake, last year I've been slowly showing her some information about the usual things about the organization that the organization is not telling her about. The Australian Royal Commission, we actually seen a couple of videos about that on YouTube, mostly when Jeffrey Jackson's, one of the governing body member, was giving his testimony under oath. And we seen his whole court appearance there. And while many members of that faith, that was the tipping point of them sort of looking into the organization and eventually leaving it. My wife thought that he did a good job defending the faith and going along with all his sort of excuses and explanation of things from their point of view. She was a full supporter without reading between the lines of what he was saying. So that didn't work. My wife is a big fan of the Leah Remini Scientology series on A&E programming, and I would more or less drop a hint here and there about how similar this was to the Jehovah Witness organization's policy. And she quickly dismissed it and, of course, accused me of trying to make some sort of connection between Scientology and the Jehovah Witness organization, which I was. And you can't deny the similarities between them. One being sort of totally cultish about it and weird, while the other one's more of a subtle sort of control. Another moment was when I mentioned to her that the Jehovah Witnesses was involved with the UN for nearly 10 years. Asked her questions about that, and that was a visible reaction from her, and she did not research that particular revelation from me about that particular thing, and it was pretty much forgotten. She dismissed it altogether, and the subject never came back up again. And then finally, the two witness rule and the implication of what that might have for child abuse victims or reporting of such crimes or more to the law enforcement authorities, that the elders, of course, have no training or capabilities of handling themselves other than to cover up the organization. Many examples. Again, I went back to the Australian Royal Commission. The lawsuits that are taking place seems more so now than ever. All these facts were brought up in the past year, slowly but surely, and pieced out, at an opportunity that I think would be to my advantage. But all those things were just not addressed. She still continues to go on with the status quo. In all that time, I was mindful that not to push too far. A lot of the videos that I've seen on YouTube with members sort of, waking up to the Jehovah Witness thing, wanting to tell everyone about their findings and sort of push their beliefs onto the ones that are still indoctrinated, having it to backfire and sort of have it to where the indoctrinated Jehovah Witness would shun them right off the bat and or turn them in and have them disfellowshipped and things of that nature. I did not want to go that far with my wife to where I turned out to be the enemy instead of the friend in that particular case. So I was really mindful not to go too far as to put myself in that classification for her. There is somewhat of a slight wall built up around her inherently just because I am considered worldly. So, of course, Satan's going to get to my way of thinking or whatever, or his way of thinking, and I'm going to, start pushing my wife away or something to that effect. Recently, another approach that was used by ex-Jehovah Witness family member that came to live with us for a little bit, that person came to my wife and tried to explain her point of view with an angle of biology and geology, sort of proving some of these biblical happenings possibly not happening, and possibly some other explanations too that I really didn't get into, or we didn't have the chance to talk about. That person also was talking to my wife about, looking into doing some research about the organization, but that didn't go anywhere as well. The conversation again was just ignored completely and just totally disregarded. And finally, And this was the clincher of it all. I forgot how we came across about talking about this particular subject, but the subject came along about Ray Franz, the person who got this fellowship, a governing body member back in the early 80s or 70s, got this fellowship after this person was doing a bit more research into the Bible and finding out a lot of the teachings of the Jehovah Witnesses were false and manipulated and changed, and the usual suspects of excuses or facts. And finally, in a political move, in my view, got rid of this person, and there was a Watchtower Bethel purge of dissenters. And mentioned that there was this book out there, and my wife wasn't interested, but mentioned about that person. She knew about Ray Franz, and that he was disfellowship. I think the subject came about that I was doing some research on the history and of the Jehovah Witnesses, because I'm coming from an angle of not demonizing or exposing the members themselves, because they're an unwitting victim to all this, but more to the point of I'm focusing my scrutiny towards the leadership of the Jehovah Witnesses from elder on up. The people themselves, they're just victims on all this, and I empathize with them, and I treat them as such, as victims of deception. So with that, I mentioned that particular person wrote a book, and I heard the book on YouTube. The whole book is it's in audio format there, and that I explained some of the things that he's seen and some similarities and everything that has to do with Ray Franz. And at that point, that was a green light for me to buy Crisis of Conscience. And the thing is, I was trying to figure out a way to try to get that copy of the book into her hands, and I was trying to figure out how can I get this book into her hands without her being, suspicious of me and my intentions. So the original plan before my family member, the XJW family, came over to live with us was to possibly use an outside source, somebody in another city or state, to give them the book and then sort of mail the book back to our household in her name with a card saying, "From a loving sister." So here's a book showing up from a loving sister, and that is JW code as from a female church member, possibly baptized, or I think baptized. Here's a book that you should read. And of course is Ray Franz, Crisis of Conscience. And the first chapter really is a sort of a history of what Ray Franz was going through when he was a full-fledged Jehovah Witness, before he sort of, started researching of what he was researching at the time. But I held off on that because the ex-JW member was coming to live with us, and this particular person was going to tell my wife about the truth in that particular person's way or method, like I mentioned before. And so I thought maybe if I had an outside source sort of deliver the book or mail the book to my wife, that it would have been too suspicious, too kind of creepy in a way. Both my, ex-JW member telling her stuff, and then, a week or two later, this book shows up out of nowhere from another state, from an anonymous JW source. So I held off on that, and because I thought the best bet was my ex-JW family member giving their testimony to my wife and all that. As you know, that fell through. And same time period when the truth about the truth was being told to my wife wasn't receptive of it. Out of respect and just listening to her family member, she listened, but it didn't take. So, and it went over her head and ignored it. And in that case, that pretty much dashed the hopes of me sort of going to my original plan of having someone else mail this particular book, because then my wife would have thought that it came from the XJW member. So that fell through. But one particular night we were having a conversation, and the subject of Ray Franz came up. And to my surprise, my wife knew who this person was, and that he was this fellowship. And my wife went to explain that he wanted to know what happened to him, what was going on with this conversation. So I elaborated a bit more about it as far as what I know, not the whole thing, but I said, hey, that person wrote a book, and I listened to the book on YouTube. So essentially it was read to me, and I know the story. And the book is well written to where it's not JW hostile, but written in such a way that it was an understanding events that took place in this person's life. So that gave me the green light to order the book. And when it came in, I presented it to my wife, and she looks at this and said, and told me that you didn't get this book from me. You wanted to read it, meaning I wanted to read it. And I was like, why would I do that? I already know what the book says. I listened to it on YouTube. I thought you wanted to know about this particular person, and here's a book for you to read if you're interested. She got hostile with me, practically turned around and walked away, and given me a gesture of, an arm swept gesture as far as, get that away from me, and walked away. Literally turned around and walked away from me. I didn't know what to make of that, so, but I kept the book anyway, and the cat's out of the bag. I got this book. It's there in the house. I'm not going to get rid of it, but this was the 5th edition, the new 5th edition of Crisis of Conscience, so I kept it because there was a couple of chapters in there that I haven't read. That was an addition to the original story from other eyewitnesses of what happened in Bethel after Ray Franz was disfellowship. So I was curious. I was going to read that. So it's there in the house somewhere there in my nightstand or one of my drawers. I remember one time I just had it out, and the next day coming back from work, I was going to sit down and read a little bit from it, and it was gone. And I asked my wife, hey, where's that book I bought? I want to read the 2 chapters I haven't seen before or whatever. She tossed it underneath the chair, sofa chair. And that was totally uncharacteristic of my wife to do, because she is a neat, clean freak, and everything has to be in its place and in order, things like that. And to take a book and toss it underneath the chair like that was totally not her. She would never do that on her own with any other thing, not even slippers or shoes or anything like that. Everything is immaculate and in its place. That right there was really strange. And I took note of that really quick. At that point, I knew that there is nothing I could say, do, or show that would convince her anything different about the Jehovah Witness organization. At that point, there was a realization that my wife has not reached like what JW Fairy Tales, this other YouTube that famously coined. She hasn't reached her Armageddon yet. She's in the tribulation and was in the tribulation of the Jehovah Witnesses for most of her life, from a toddler on to the present day, but she hasn't recognized or experienced her own personal Armageddon. To take a line out of JW Fairy Tales videos, I realize that now. That was the clincher. I can't push any more than what I'm introducing right now, because that would set off the events for the prosecution complex that they experience. And one of the characteristics of the bite model will take over, and her JW brain will switch to high guard mode, if you will. And that's exactly what happened. After a while, that high guard mode goes away, and everything comes back to our version of what's normal. Everything goes along as before. But there would be some, feelings of mistrust and things like that coming from my wife now. This is my wife's point of view as I see it. So I'm backing off completely. I think I've done the most I could do in my capacity and lack of dealing with this. There's absolutely nothing I can do at this point now, I don't think, except keep on doing what I'm doing, not being the JW stereotype of the horrible, unbelieving spouse that is hostile to the JW dogma, which I am, but I'm taking a different approach to that, which I will elaborate in later videos. But at this point, I'm pulling away, not my love for my wife or anything like that, or my caring for my wife, but the activism against the organization towards my wife. I'm backing off from that particular effort at this time and redirecting, recollecting, and reusing my resources towards my children. My wife, I think she lived her life. She's continuing to live her life, and that I lived my life. I've lived a good life, I would say, and but my children hasn't gotten to that point yet. They're just starting with their lives, and I don't want this organization to be the lion's share of their memory. I want to build positive memories, make good memories for when they grow up. I don't want them to sort of grow up older and say, why I didn't do this, why I didn't do that. It was all in vain. Instead, I want them to look back in their lives and say, hopefully, I'm dreaming here, wow, I had a good life, like I had, in my opinion. So, I'm going to concentrate on the kids and winning the hearts and minds of my kids. I got some of it, so I think I'm ahead in that department, but I'm going to have to put my life on hold right now and take this particular mission of mine, if you will, to full extent, to make sure that my children don't grow up the way my wife has grown up, living under this organization. The thing is, my wife was not given a choice. Both her parents were JWs. Her whole family are JWs, and that's all she knew at that time. That was the only influence that she had in her life. Maybe there were worldly people in her life, but it was overshadowed by the parents and their influence on my wife, where in my household, there is a voice of difference there, a difference of opinion. The big thing that I take of it, with all the observations I've made to this date, is give the kids a choice. They will choose what they want to follow, and it's my job to kind of point out all the differences that me and you know about the organization and give a difference of opinion other than the party line given by the organization through my wife and her side of the family. So that's how I'm directing my activism, if you will. Full focus on my kids, and let's see what happens. And of course, it will be documented, and whether good, bad, what works, what didn't work, and all the details in between. I will be making more videos, a lot more, because like I said, this is going to be pretty much a full-time job. Like I said, I'm putting my life on hold right now. All my hobbies is going to take a back seat. The everyday life that I have, that's going to be put on hold to concentrate in educating myself of the JW dogma and so forth, to get into their way of thinking, to figure out how I can use that to my advantage to help my children realize or make their own decision on what they want. I think I rambled a bit too much. Like I said, I'm going to make more videos, and we'll see what happens. All right.